The way to get ahead in life is to find stringent, habitual patterns and structures and stick to them consistently, no matter what. Never pen yourself into any sort of structure that might restrict your responsiveness to the organic emergence of the great mystery of life. Wait. No, wait. How can these two things coexist and yield for us an emergent, productive, structured, organic life? Welcome to humanBeing, where we gather to practice being more skillfully, creatively human together. Not toward some impossible ideal of perfection, but toward greater, authentic connection. My name is Daniel Jacob Self, and I am so grateful to be here with you today. As always, we're going to start today with a breath. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I just invite you to take a moment and take a breath. Notice what it's like to give yourself that attention. One deep, nourishing breath. Okay, here we are. So today I want to talk about this idea of finding balance between structure and emergence. I know throughout my life, I have battled between these two polar opposites, these two extremes. On the one hand, feeling as though if I don't structure things out, find habits and practices, stick to consistent routines, I will never accomplish anything. On the other hand, I have also experienced that desire for emergent flow, for finding in the organicity of each moment what is wanted, what is desired, what is called for. And what I haven't seen is a lot of people talking about how these two can work in concert. And in fact, when working together, can create a much more fulfilling life than either of them could ever hope to do on their own. So as always, I like to start with just a little bit of context about where I'm coming from and what my experience is to help situate myself in the work, help you have a sense of who is speaking to you and from where, rather than being some anonymous talking head on a video far away. So throughout my adolescence as a ballet dancer, my life was consumed with technique. Every day I focused so hard on exactly where to place each finger, exactly how to hold my body, exactly which muscle group to engage in what way. My entire life was about this very structured way of being. And I did receive a lot from that. My life felt very clear. Each day I knew exactly what my life was about. Getting up, going to class, and studying and refining. It's a very fine-tuned way of being in the world. But then as I became more and more disenchanted with the ballet world and felt a sort of hollowness or a sort of lack of heart inside of the frame and inside of the structure, I pendulum swung really hard into a handful of years of really living from a much more reactive place where life was sort of just happening to me. And I was being bounced around by it. I took each day as it came, and I didn't give much thought to how I might live a more intentional life. And so between these two pendulum swings, I got through a big portion of my younger years, and it wasn't until later on, as a result of much pain that came and suffering, which came as a result of this sort of bouncing through life with no sense of agency or intention, I then pendulum swung back the other way again, really hard. And I started going down all of these YouTube rabbit holes of hyper productivity and how to structure each moment of one's life and how to time track and all of these things to make myself far more like a machine than a human. And what I would find when I would do that would be this initial upswing of motivation and life force and excitement that came with this really regimented way of living. And it really connected me back to my ballet days where everything was handed to me very specifically and all I had to do was do it. And it was great. However, what I found time and time again, and what you may also have found in any explorations of your own, is that I could not make this sustainable. I could not keep that level of intense, every moment tracked, everything planned out. I couldn't keep that going throughout my life. It didn't seem to work past a certain point. So there would always be this spike of energy and excitement, and then it would sort of level out and then usually crash. And so I went through that cycle for a while, back and forth and up and down, trying to find which of these two extremes is right, the emergence or the structure. And so as you may have predicted at the beginning of this story, what I've ended up coming to at this point in my exploration is that actually for me, a sense of balance between these two things, between the emergent and the structured, finding that dance between the two of them has been what I've been devoting my life to ever since. And it's yielded a much more rich, full, and yes, balanced life for me. You know, in my last piece, I spoke about the importance of finding our inner home, that place from which we can move out into the world and return to at any time to help discover what is true for us, what is right for us, so that we don't get confused when other people's influence and other people's sense of what is right for us sort of comes at us as we move through the world. Today, I really want to spend some time talking about this duality between structure and emergence, which long before I started to be able to find my sense of inner home, bounced me back and forth in really damaging ways between rigidity on the one hand and a complete lack of agency and intentionality on the other. And so I want to share a bit about what I'm currently finding around how these two forces can work in beautiful, enlivened, and inspiring harmony. You know, in the past two pieces I've done, I've given a really hard time to my former career as a professional actor, and I think, you know, fairly, and I think with good reason. But what I want to actually start with today, that there was a lot in my acting training that I learned that not only did really serve me at the time, but even as I've transitioned into my current work in somatic restorative practices and coaching and therapy, has actually had some really powerful correlations. And so I want to start today actually by sharing a story from the acting and performing world, but not one that actually was originally mine. The story I want to share today actually came to me through my mom. My mom used to be an actor in New York City back in the day and passed this story on to me, and I grew up hearing this story, and it's always really stuck with me. So I want to pass it on from my mom to you. So this story has to do with one of my mom's teachers, the great Catherine Surgava from HB Studios down in Greenwich Village. And apparently she once said to my mom's class, you know, when you're up on stage playing a part, there are days where you step out onto that stage under those lights in front of that audience and something magical happens. You transform into the character. Everything moves through you in this sort of divine creative magic. And then there are other days where you don't, where it doesn't. That sort of magic doesn't occur, that transformation doesn't happen. And what Catherine apparently said to my mother, who said to me, is that it is for those days that we study technique and that we develop our skillfulness. It is to aid us in being able to bring about more of those days that we study and we work hard, rather than just waiting for the lightning strike of that divine inspired moment to come to us. Because while we can't force inspiration to come, we can't make the magic occur, that doesn't come from us. What we can do is we can create the house inside of us to invite the spirit to come and to fill. We can create an environment that is most likely to catch a spark, as well as just to get us through the days where maybe no fire's coming at all. You know, as I've progressed in my healing journey, especially as it pertains to escaping from this pendulum swing, this sort of roller coaster of overstructure versus aimless wandering, I have come back again and again to this story of creating the house for the spirit to fill. I don't want an empty house that's hollow. And I don't want spirit that is zooming around without any sense of containment, because I have a physical form. I'm part of this physical world. Spirit without structure is not something that I think is like a part of this plane of existence. And of course, there are peak moments we can access that through different sort of spiritual experiences, maybe psychedelic experiences, etc. But for the day-to-day, this metaphor of cultivating the house, of building the house, of tending to the structure that the spirit can come in and fill, creating the environment that is most likely to catch fire. That has been really inspiring to me and really orienting in my growth in my work and my life. There's this amazing quote from the great Twyla Tharp, the choreographer, where she says, "You don't get lucky without preparation, and there's no sense in being prepared if you're not open to the possibility of a glorious accident just one of those things that I come back to remind me of this duality. And in fact, it's not contradictory, but that each part is important to be present. And when we lose sight of either one, that's when things tend to go awry, either to become hollow or to become unmanageable. One way that I've found to start thinking about and illuminating this balance of these two forces has to do with movement and the body. Healing and performing artist Daria Halprin has this great way of talking about the expressive body. She says, just as the physical body gives us a literal and concrete structure that expresses who we are, so every part and function of the body can also be understood as metaphors for the expression of our being. I've been thinking a lot about the interplay between bone and muscle. You know, muscles have this amazing ability to be stimulated into contraction by the power of our mind's inspiration. And bones have this incredible capacity to hold structure and form, to give contour and substance to our physical existence. But without muscles, bones are simply static shapes. They're lifeless sculptures, and they need the magical spark of the stimulated muscle in order to come alive. But without bones, muscles are simply these erratic, twitching masses, enlivened, but in no way oriented, unable to actually achieve any form of solid movement. They need the shape and the solidity of bone to pull against, to anchor their inspired contractions. So both muscle and bone are needed, working in concert, in harmony, in tandem, in order for us to achieve true, meaningful movement. And so anytime that I notice I might be favoring either more the bone or more the muscle, more the overstructure or more the emergence, I ask myself if perhaps I am villainizing or idolizing one or the other. So perhaps I am in a moment where I am feeling it's all about that emergence, it's all about the organicity of the present moment, and then I'm sort of scorning or looking down at the idea of structure and practice and regularity. Or conversely, perhaps I am really going all in on the practice and the regularity and the habits, and I am neglecting to pay attention to and to honor the emergent. And thinking about this interplay between muscle and bone is a great orienting image for me to come back to in those moments when I am seeking to restore a balance that can help both be aligned and both be alive as I seek greater movement forward. So now I want to take a little bit of a departure and talk about something that feels very closely related and very important and connected to me, but speaks to a slightly different facet of what we're talking about. And that is, in my studies about learning and liberation, I came across this powerful idea that some of you may have heard of called Praxis. Now, this is a term that originally comes from the ancient Greek and from Aristotle, but in the context of this more liberatory pedagogy, Praxis comes to us from Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's a very seminal work on the power of education as a means of social change. And what he spoke about was that action without reflection is aimless, but that reflection without action is anemic. That we need reflection and introspection, which can then inform our actions in the world, which then we can take back and reflect further upon in order to inform our next action. And this process he spoke about as praxis. The reason it feels important to bring up in the context of this conversation surrounding structure versus emergence is that, for one thing, it helps to widen the conversation from this sort of hyper-individualistic, habit-forming, how do we most efficiently live our own lives in a way that's disconnected from our sense of connection to each other and to the larger world and to the actions that we wish to take for the sake of creating greater healing around us. And the second reason to me is because it's yet another way that I am able to remind myself of the crucial interplay between the balance of these seeming extreme opposites, that either one without the other is incomplete. The form outlined by bone is useless, it's stagnant without the muscle of action. But the muscle of action is directionless without the shape and the form and the anchorage given to it by bone. So once again, not only does this help illustrate to me that these seeming extremes are actually not mutually exclusive by any means, but it also brings up the last piece that I want to talk about today, which has to do with cycles and rhythm. Okay. Lewis Hyde, in this incredible book called The Gift, speaks about it this way. One of ecology's first lessons was that beneath all the change in nature, there are steady states characterized by cycles. Every participant in the cycle literally lives off the others, with only the ultimate energy source, the sun, being transcendent. One of the ways that I think the hyperproductivity movement really let me down was in its exclusion of the reality of cycles that exist beyond the 24-hour daily cycle or the 7-day week cycle. And given that the cultural milieu out of which this movement itself rises is largely based on patriarchal, post-industrial values, that isn't a big surprise. Stowe Boyd, in an article on how we engage with time, says that pre-industrial, pre-clock time was perceived as running in long cycles and not as a linear succession of uniform hours, the system we've adopted since the rise of railroads and factories, where schedule keeping has come to dominate the concept of time. And so this really makes me wonder, what would it feel like to think about finding balance between the structured and the emergent, not just in any given moment, not just in any given day, but within a given month, a given season, a given year. And the challenge that I've found as I've started looking at this for myself, it seems to be twofold. On one hand, the world that most of us are operating within during our day-to-day lives, it still counts time in the linear success of uniform hours. It still counts time in 24-hour days, 7-day weeks. We have our work day, we have our work week, and this is the world that most of us are having to operate within. So how might we find a way of existing within such a static structure in a far more dynamic and enlivened way? That's the first challenge I've come across. And that feels more like the muscular challenge within the skeletal muscular dyad. So how do we keep those muscles firing with emergent, enlivened spontaneity within a very static structure? But then the second challenge, and the more, I guess, skeletal one, you could say, has to do with intentionality. So how do we achieve a sort of balance that spans more than what our sort of immediate memories tend to be able to hold? How do we broaden our awareness and lift our gaze from just the moment to moment, day by day, into those larger arcs of time to try and create a greater sense of balance between them and across them? And as I was sitting with and thinking about these conundrums, it started to feel to me like they both related back to our old friend, our lack of cultural connection and our lack of connection to the land. We used to have these very grounding, literally and figuratively grounding structures, rituals that we would come back to daily, and then practices and cycles that we would come to seasonally. So things that needed to be done at very specific times of the year that really helped us to root into where we were in these larger arcs, these larger cycles. But now, because most of us are existing within this 24-hour day, 7-day a week, 12-month a year, these uniform, sort of static, unchanging patterns, and many of us are very disconnected from the land and from these sort of more cultural groundings and practices. It leaves us with this question of how we do track these larger arcs and how we do connect back to a sort of variance between days that the systems we're existing within the larger overculture don't seem to make a lot of room for. And so, as I've been sitting with it, in their absence, one of the things that I've been experimenting with is creating a more individualized sort of journaling and tracking methodology, which incorporates some tool sets and sort of frameworks from the hyperproductivity world, but tries to bring the best of those into concert with more of a sense of cultural and natural rhythm. And so if you have a chance, be sure to go to danieljacobself.com and click on humanBeing and sign up so I can let you know as those systems develop further, and I'll want to share them and get your feedback and your input. And we can adjust and play and learn with those sort of structures and more specific mechanisms for tracking that larger accountability to ourselves across time together. Okay, so before we move into the last thing I want to talk about today, just inviting you to take one more moment, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, to notice your body, to notice your breathing, to notice any places that might be tense or holding, see if they want to be invited to find a little movement, a little relaxation, and then taking one more deep breath if it feels right to you right now. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to talk about has to do with this idea of rhythm, which to me feels slightly distinct from cycles, though of course there's an overlap there. But to me, when I think about rhythm, I think about this really great quote from Lexi Eichelboom, who explains, "The pathways of the brain are literally organized according to the impulses that are repeatedly fired." Rhythm is not simply a metaphor here, but a physical phenomenon. Thought happens through pulses in the brain. And so when I think about the nature of rhythm, it is something that helps me to feel that muscular connection to those electrical impulses of aliveness that we've been talking about throughout our piece today. And it's proven to me to be a helpful litmus test or orienting question in any given moment with any sort of practice or any sort of structure that I'm trying to find in my life. Can I feel the rhythm of it? Can I feel that sort of aliveness within it, so that even though it is the structure, that the spirit can come and move within, that even that structure itself has an aliveness to it. And for whatever reason, that aliveness to me occurs to me in the context of rhythm. And so this idea of an emergent organic structure within which further emergence can occur, well, immediately my mind started thinking about cells and that semi-permeable membrane of a cell, which is what I decided to craft the practice around, in part, that's associated with this piece, is mapping our own sort of individual cell and cell walls. So if you head over to danieljacobself.com, again, click on Human Being, you can get access to that practice, and I'm really curious what you make of it and excited to talk more about it. But in the meantime, I do invite you to spend some time just tuning in as you begin to find a practice or a structure. Can you determine for yourself the ones that feel as though they have a sort of enlivened rhythm to them versus the ones that maybe feel a little more static or stale? And do you notice that those enlivened rhythmic practices, as I have noticed, seem to be more sustainable over time? Really curious what you'll find as you tune into that a little more. So please do head over to danieljacobself.com, click on Human Being to join in the discussion, participate in the practices, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there very soon. But until then, from here, through here, to there, sending so much care.